Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I am just another tinfoil hat. Welcome to my show. Today, we are going to be discussing the fascinating case of the Godfrey, Illinois tinfoil troupe. So, this event occurred near the small town of Godfrey, Illinois, in October of 1975, the night to very early morning of the 12th to 13th of October, to be precise. The witness in MUFON's Skylook magazine article detailing this event was referred to as Miss X. However, the sketch included clearly listed the residence as the Hicks residence, and then in the Center for UFO Studies humanoid catalog, she is referred to as Mrs. Hicks, a 26-year-old housewife with 3 children. Now, the night of October 12th, she waited for her husband to leave for work, about 11:30-ish, and then went to bed. She fell asleep and woke up at around 1:30 in the morning. It was at this point that she just simply couldn't get back to sleep. Mrs. Hicks claimed that she lay awake for about half an hour when, around 2 in the morning, the family's Irish sheepdog, who was named Sarge, began barking viciously from the ground floor right under her bedroom. Now, Mrs. Hicks thought that perhaps, a raccoon or some other creature had gotten into the trash. So, this has happened before. She just got up. She didn't even bother to turn out the lights. She just decided to go take a look out her bedroom window to see what the ruckus was. Now, surprise, surprise, what she saw was not your friendly neighborhood garbage can rambler. No, what Mrs. Hicks saw when she looked out her bedroom window was a bizarre being which was running from the back of the house towards a nearby woodland which bordered a quarry. She said that her very first impression, and this is actually really interesting to me at least, is that her absolute first impression was that she was looking at some sort of silvery wolf which ran on 2 legs. Now, as the being ran towards the woods, she said that as it was partway across the yard, it actually turned to look back at the house and completely froze. So at this point, Mrs. Hicks was able to get a very good look of the creature. She said that it was a humanoid which stood about 3.5 feet tall, and it was completely luminous except for a dark spot where its face would be. There is an included sketch, and it really gives the impression of some of the classic diving suit entities, where it's not an incredibly detailed humanoid form, which then has kind of a differentiated face plate or face shape. So forget the tinfoil hat as well. She said that this being looked like the entire outfit, as she called it, was some sort of silvery material, much like aluminum foil, which actually gave off a white glow that was strong enough to illuminate the immediate surrounding area. So as it was standing completely motionless, 3 identical entities came from someplace beside the house and joined up with the first, then ran in a single file line into the woods. Mrs. Hicks said that all of them were identical and each ran in this kind of stiff legged fashion, with their toes pointing up, like they were running on their heels. Again, super weird description there. So Mrs. Hicks claimed as well that while this whole event occurred, there was absolutely no noise. Not the typical nighttime sounds of birds, bugs, wind. And strangely enough, she also said that there was no noise of the beings running across the yard, trampling on brush or grass or branches or anything like that. Everything was completely silent. I would love to know if she could still hear Sarge barking at this point in time. Unfortunately, that detail is not included. Now, as soon as the creatures made it to the edge of the woods, Mrs. Hicks actually just decided to lay back down. She said that she really wanted to see where they would go after reaching the tree line, but she was just so afraid that if she was noticed watching them, they would approach the house and try to come in. So effectively, she laid down and hid from the window. Finally, she called her husband and asked him to come home simply because she was so frightened of what she had seen. So Mr. Hicks did come back, and he and a neighbor armed themselves and went into the woods to search for these beings, surprise, surprise, to no avail. At which point they called the local police, who also took a look around and found nothing out of place. So this case really, it's one of those that it didn't last very long. It's not like it was really that dramatic, but there are a lot of aspects of it which I find extremely interesting. Again, we have an encounter kind of being ushered in by the family dog just absolutely going berserk. Two, I think it's a little interesting just the timing of it. Mrs. Hicks wakes up in the middle of the night. She can't go back to sleep. She's lying awake. Then she hears the dog, goes to the window, and sees the event. Of course, as with many of these cases, everything could just be coincidental. It just so happened she was awake. It just so happened the dog noticed some disturbance. And of course, then she got up to look at it, and there was something to be seen. However, on the flip side, it also does seem like a really strong narrative. The fact that she's awake for, what appears to be no reason. then the dog experiences something, then she experiences it. It's kind of just one of those things which seems by now almost like a trope. Now, on the topic of canines, too, the fact that she said her first impression was that she was looking at a silver wolf is incredibly interesting to me because there's nothing in the physical description of the beings which really stands out as canid in any way. There's no pointed ears, no snout. Um, they didn't appear to be furry by her description. So it's odd to me that she would kind of zero in as saying that she thought it was a silver wolf running bipedally, which she was looking at. Especially, again, coincidentally or synchronistically enough, in the town of Godfrey, Illinois. Because one of her descriptors of the beings reminds me of a lot of different descriptors used by witnesses throughout the many cases which Linda Godfrey identified as belonging to the man wolf or dog man categories. And that is, they walked funny or they ran funny. This is a line that you see time and time again when witnesses are trying to describe their encounters with, for all intents and purposes, werewolves. They say that it looked like they were walking funny on their heels or very rigid. And so, yet again, we see this in this case where she said that the beings ran funny, like their toes were pointed up and they were running on their heels. But aside from that, there's really no correlation, again, in the physical description of the beings to anything dog like or wolf like. Of course, too, another really common thing here we have is that the beings appear to have no face. Now, in her sketch and then also kind of the description, we do see the very classic diving suit type entities where there's just this almost like porthole where their face would be, which is typically darker than the rest of the outfit, or contrary-wise, another common thing which we see with the diving suit entities is that the face is luminous while the rest of the body is not. So it's kind of like a give and take there between those two concepts. Another really common thing is the so-called Oz effect. She said that while she was watching the entities, there was absolutely no noise. And I think that this really does just point to the fact that these encounters maybe are not happening exactly in our typical plane of existence, in our, three-dimensional world which abides by physical laws. That maybe the percipient is kind of in a different sort of mind space when this is happening, which just focuses all of their attention on whatever these manifestations are. In line with that, too, is just how odd it is that so many, encounters with beings which are usually lopped in the spaceman category, these entities are running into the forest, and this one, too, actually, the forest bordered a quarry, which, of course, John Keel pointed out as one of the different types of locations where UFOs just seem to really populate. So again, here, it's like you have these four, for all intents and purposes, UFO occupants or spacemen running across a yard into a forest, and there's actually no UFO seen. Even in Skylook magazine, they actually said that this is really just tied to ufology by the barest of threads, and that was simply because these entities, they don't really fit into any of the other typical categories for humanoids, such as Bigfoot. So it's just odd to me how many UFO encounters, and again, kind of quote unquote UFO encounters, occur in areas which are way more linked with Sasquatch or other, wild cryptid type beings. And also in line with this is the common thing where you have these beings look like they're running for cover and they don't want to be seen, and then they pose. As she said, this being was running, to the cover of the forest, and then halfway across the yard, it just kind of struck a pose and looked back at the house before being joined up by three other entities exactly like it. Two, regarding the fact that there were four entities in total, each of them identical, the way that they continued on in a straight file line, it really calls to mind to me a lot of aspects of the fairy faith, where you have the troops of the marching good folk, how they kind of appear to move in some sort of almost military fashion or a formal fashion. So you have these bizarre little silver entities with no faces joining up and then moving single file into the forest. Again, another association to the much older belief system of the fairy faith. Well, if you enjoyed this episode on the tinfoil troupe, please like, and if you're new to this field of crop circles, go ahead and subscribe to see what weirdness the future may have in store. Till then, you can keep up with whatever else I might possibly have going on my free blog at patreon.com/justanothertinfoilhat. For today, I am Zelia Edgar, signing off.
Doing.